I removed the original fenders from my Jetson Bolt Pro, planning to eventually put something on that was more suited for rainy weather. I couldn't find anything online with full wheel coverage and specifically made to fit the Jetson Bolt Pro. Instead, I decided to see if I could DIY something out of PVC pipe. Stay tuned so that you can see how I do this next. This video will demonstrate how I'll use PVC pipe to make a set of bicycle fenders. I've never done this before, and the only thing I know for now is that I want to use PVC pipe. As far as tools needed and other essential parts, I'll have to play it by ear and figure that out as I go. I plan to use 1 1/4 inch PVC pipe because it's what I already have, and it also looks close enough to a size that can be made into a fender to fit over the Jetson tires. The PVC pipe I'm using is different from the ones I've used on previous projects. The walls of the pipe are very thin. For most of my PVC projects, that wouldn't work, but for this project it's perfect. To construct the fender, first start out by heating the PVC to make it more pliable. I'm using a torch because of the convenience of working in my workshop. If I didn't have a torch, I could use the heat from a stovetop burner. Once the PVC is soft enough, which doesn't take much heat, use the ABS pipe as a mold to reshape the PVC into a straight half-cylinder piece. This straight piece of half-cylinder is a good starting point for turning the PVC pipe into any size of fender. I'm doing the next step in forming the fenders using this 14-inch bicycle tire made more rigid by inflating a tube within it. I'm going to tape one end of the PVC pipe to the tire. This will hold that end in place while I shape the rest of the PVC into the fender by wrapping it around the tire. I'm crossing my fingers that the tire won't start melting from the heated PVC. These tires were the original ones that came with the Jetson Bolt Pro, and they're still good, but I've replaced them with lighter weight ones. I'll gradually heat up all around small sections of the PVC to get it to bend nicely around the tire, using a piece of wood to press it as flat as possible against the tire. As I work my way through the length of the PVC, I'll tape down small sections to the tire to help the PVC keep its shape as I work my way through the rest of it. After about a minute, the fender should be cool enough to remove from the tire. With how hot the PVC was heated to, I was worried the masking tape adhesive would stick to the tire and PVC, but it didn't seem to, so I'm glad for that. In looking over the completed fender, this did not come out exactly as I thought it would. I had hoped the folds could be smashed down thinner, but that didn't happen. The overall shape of the fender is great and fits over the tire perfectly. I guess I don't need it to look nice as much as I need it to stop water from spraying up in the rain. So, I will use this fender, but try to come up with a better technique for shaping the next one. One last thing I needed to do was heat up and stretch the fender out a little so it fits over the tire like a fender instead of the tight fit like when I was just done shaping the fender. I've done that here, and you can see there is a reasonable gap between the fender and the tire throughout the circumference of the fender. I'm going to try something new for this second fender. It still won't look the prettiest, but I think the final product will make a good fender. To start, I'll draw 2 lines to outline a channel down the center of the PVC's length. This will mark an area where I won't cut into as I work on other parts of the PVC. Next, I'll draw perpendicular lines, kind of evenly spaced apart, but the spacing doesn't need to be accurate. What's important is when drawing the lines on the other side of the channel, the perpendicular lines on each side should line up. As you can see, I've already cut the perpendicular lines right up to the channel lines. I used my table saw, but even a handsaw will work well. There's no accuracy required for these cuts. They're meant to make bending the outer edge of the fender a lot easier, or at least that's the plan. We'll have to see how things go when bending the edge of the PVC. With the perpendicular cuts along the side of the fender, bending the PVC is now a lot easier. Without any heat, the PVC is flexible enough to bend around the circumference of the tire. Before I apply heat, I'm going to zip tie the ends of the PVC to the tire to prevent it from springing back to its flat shape. With the PVC secured, I can apply heat so the PVC can now take the rounded shape of the tire. This technique seems so much easier and cleaner than my first attempt. I'll remove the fender from the tire to make sure it keeps its shape, which it does so due to the heating and cooling process the PVC just went through. When compared to the first fender, it's similar enough to know it should work okay. It is a bit springy, so in the process of mounting it, I'll also have to figure a way to stiffen it. I think these two fenders should suffice, and now I'll start work on mounting them. I sort of have an idea of how I want to fabricate the brackets that will mount the fender to the frame. This is the flat bar I'll be using for one of two brackets for each fender. It's 12 gauge, 1 1/4 inch wide steel flat bar. I realized after bringing it home that the flat bar was a little too thick, but after redesigning the bracket, I think it'll work just fine. I'll bend the flat bar into an L bracket using my DIY bending brake that I featured in a video back in June of 2020. I initially wanted the bend to be about 3/4 of an inch from one of the ends, but my bending brake doesn't allow me to get that close to the edge, so I'll just bend it as close as I can to the edge and cut it to size afterwards. My DIY bending brake requires a bit of work to get the job done, but it does a good job at making 90-degree bends. Its only limitation is that it's not designed to bend thicker pieces of metal. It's only meant for sheet metal, and I feel like even this 12-gauge steel flat bar is pushing its limit. To complete the bend, I'll keep tightening these nuts until they can't be tightened anymore. At that point, the flat bar will be close enough to a 90-degree bend, and I can make fine adjustments with a hammer. Once the bend is complete, I can remove the flat bar to make sure the bend looks okay. Considering it's just a fender bracket, the bend doesn't need to be exact. I've already cut the L bracket to size, where the short side is the tab that will mount to the frame and the long side will bolt to the fender. I don't have many metal working tools for this kind of work, so the hacksaw and file you see here is what I used. I'm drilling pilot holes for now until I know the hole sizes. There are 2 holes to mount the fender and 1 hole for the frame. The fender holes don't need to be aligned accurately. 2 bolts should be enough to hold the fender securely in place. On the other hand, I want the frame hole to be centered exactly so that the long side of the bracket presses up against the underside of where it mounts to the frame. Doing this will help keep it from moving once bolted in place. I'm using 2 stainless steel screws to mount the bracket to the fender. The size of the screw is not important, as long as it's long enough to fit the thickness of the bracket, fender, a washer, and a nut. I'm also using blue Loctite to prevent the nut from coming loose over time, but still allow it to be removed if necessary. I also have to cut the fender to length before mounting it. I've fitted over the rear wheel of the Jetson and marked where I felt would be a good length to cut it, as you can see here by the dashed line. I'm using the stock mounting bolt that came with the Jetson Bolt Pro to mount this fender. It's a single hex head bolt that mounts the fender to the frame. As with the fender bolts, I'm using blue Loctite to prevent the bolt from coming loose over time. A quick review of how things look so far. The fender seems pretty solid in place. The side nearest the cranks doesn't move around too much because of the short length from where it's mounted. The opposite end, though, is very bendable and will need to be reinforced, probably with something mounted between the end of the fender and the rear wheel mounts. I didn't record what I did to make the L bracket to hold the end of the fender to the rear wheel mount, since it is a pretty simple bracket as you can see. Fender bolt is held on with Loctite red and the rear wheel mount bolt is held on with Loctite blue. I'm also not going to go over making and mounting the brackets for the front fender because it's basically the same process as everything I did for the rear fender. This was a great project for me because I did want some commuter style fenders for my Jetson. They weren't as easy to make as I thought they might be, and they're not the most stylish looking fenders, but I'm sure they'll still get the job done. Watch for a splash test video once I get the front fender mounted, which is going to be that other terrible looking fender. I hope this project motivates you to maybe find some better materials for DIYing your own fenders. Leave your questions and comments in the comment section below. That's all I have for now, and I'll catch you in the next video.